What happens in the space between a scream and silence, between the moment a life hangs in the balance and the terrible finality that follows? Tonight, I want to take you to a place where trust becomes betrayal, where love curdles into something unrecognizable. A place where a 5-year-old girl named Isabella learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the very ones you need protection from. This is a story that gripped an entire nation. Brazil, a country where family is sacred, where children are treasured like precious gems. But it's also a story that can happen anywhere, because monsters you see don't always hide on the bed. Sometimes they live in it. Picture this: Sao Paulo, 2008, a sprawling metropolis where concrete towers stretch toward heaven, but shadows pool deep in the spaces between. In one of these towers, the London building they called it, as if giving an elegant name could mask what was about to unfold within its walls, lived a modern family arrangement that seemed perfectly normal on the surface. Alexander was a law student, handsome in that confident way that attracts both opportunity and trouble. Anna Carolina, his wife, his partner, his accomplice in ways neither of them yet understood, was building a life with him and their 2 infant sons. A picture-perfect family, if you didn't look too closely. But there was another child in this equation, Isabella. Every other weekend, this little girl with dark eyes and an infectious smile would arrive at the London building, carrying a small bag and larger questions she was too young to articulate. She was Alexander's daughter from a previous relationship, a relationship that had ended when her mother discovered his betrayal, when she realized that the man she loved was already building a future with someone else. Can you imagine the weight of that? A child caught between 2 worlds, 2 families, 2 versions of love that somehow couldn't coexist? Isabella's mother, Anna Carolina. Yes, both women share the same first name, as if fate had a cruel sense of irony, would drop her daughter off at the towering building, trusting that the man who had broken her heart could at least keep their child safe. But trust, like glass, is beautiful until it shatters. And in the London building, cracks were already beginning to show. Anna Carolina, the stepmother, had a problem. Or perhaps, more accurately, she was a problem. Those who knew her described a woman consumed by something darker than mere jealousy. She couldn't bear the evidence of her husband's past life, couldn't stand the living reminder that she hadn't been his first choice, his first love, his first anything. Every other weekend, when Isabella would arrive with her small suitcase and trusting eyes, Anna Carolina would feel it, that burning in her chest, that voice whispering that this child was an intruder, a threat to the perfect family she was trying to build. Neighbors would later remember strange things. The way Anna Carolina would take over communications with Isabella's mother, as if inserting herself as the primary guardian. The way other family members seemed reluctant to leave Isabella alone with her stepmother. The way even Alexander's own sister would mysteriously appear to help when he wasn't around. But perhaps most chilling of all was what Alexander's own grandmother supposedly said, words that would later seem prophetic in their horror. That woman is crazy. She's capable of throwing the girl out the window one day. How many times do we hear such warnings and dismiss them as family drama, as exaggeration born of dislike? How many times do we ignore the voices trying to tell us that something is terribly wrong? Isabella's mother began to notice changes. Her daughter would sometimes return from weekend visits crying, begging to come home early. But what child doesn't have difficult weekends with divorced parents? What mother doesn't worry too much? We want to believe in the best of people, don't we? We want to trust that adults will do right by children, that family means safety, that love conquers all the petty jealousies and resentments that poison our hearts. But sometimes the very people who should love us most become the ones who hurt us deepest. March 29th, 2008. A Saturday night in Sao Paulo. Humid and restless like the city itself. Picture the scene. Alexander's car pulling into the underground parking garage of the London building. Inside, a family returning from an evening visit to the grandmother's house. Two infant boys fast asleep in their car seats, their mother Anna Carolina gathering their things, and 5-year-old Isabella, drowsy from a long day, leaning against a window. This is the moment everything changes. The last moment when this story could have had a different ending, according to Alexander's account. And remember, in stories like this, every detail matters. Every word choice reveals something. He carried Isabella up to the 6th floor first. Alone, he said she was already sleeping. So he took her directly to the guest room, turned on a small lamp, locked the apartment door, and returned to help Anna Carolina with the other children. But here's where the story begins to fray at the edges. When Alexander and Anna Carolina returned to the apartment with the babies, something was different. The light in Isabella's room was on. Not the gentle glow of the lamp he claimed to have left burning, but the harsh brightness of the overhead light. And Isabella was gone. They found a safety screen, a protective barrier designed to keep children from falling, torn and hanging like a wound in the window frame. Below, 6 floors down, in the garden that was supposed to be a place of beauty and peace, lay Isabella. Anna Carolina would later say she was hysteric when she called Isabella's mother. She screamed that the child had fallen, that something terrible had happened. But listen to her words, not Isabella fell, but Isabella was thrown, even in her supposed panic. Even in those first moments of chaos, she knew the truth about what had happened in that apartment. They tried to clean it up, you know. They tried to make it look like an accident, like a tragedy that had simply happened. But blood tells stories that words cannot hide. And Isabella's blood was everywhere. In the car. How does a sleeping child's blood end up in the family car? On towels and diapers in the apartment. Evidence of a struggle, of violence, of a little girl fighting for her life. Her vomit on Alexander's shirt. The body's final protest against unthinkable cruelty. Her tiny footprints, still visible in the fabric of the bed placed beneath the window. The investigators found her there, standing on that bed, perhaps trying to escape, perhaps pleading for her life before she was pushed through the torn screen. And the screen itself, fragments of its plastic weave were found embedded in Isabella's shirt, telling the story of her final desperate moments. In the kitchen, investigators found scissors with fragments of the safety screen still clinging to the blades. Someone had deliberately cut through a barrier designed to protect children, had methodically created an opening large enough for a small body to pass through. This was no accident. This was no crime of passion. This was calculated, planned, executed with a cold precision that chills the soul. But perhaps the most damning evidence was medical. Isabella's injuries told a story her killers never intended to reveal. The fall should have broken her body in multiple places. 6 floors of concrete and gravity should have left her shattered beyond recognition. But the medical examiner found something else entirely. Only her wrists were broken. The defensive wounds of a child trying to protect herself from being pushed. The other injuries, the ones that actually killed her, had happened before the fall. Isabella had been beaten, strangled, tortured in that apartment, while 2 adults, 2 people who should have protected her, took turns destroying her small body. She was already dying when they threw her from the window. The fall was just the final act in a play that had been scripted in jealousy and rage. But the most chilling part of this story isn't the violence itself. It's the performance that followed. Alexander and Anna Carolina called the police. They called Isabella's mother. They summoned paramedics and stood by helplessly as the little girl they had just murdered lay dying in the garden below. For 34 minutes, rescue workers tried to revive Isabella. 34 minutes of CPR, of desperate attempts to restart a heart that had been stopped by the cruelty of the people who were supposed to love her. And during those 34 minutes, Alexander and Anna Carolina played their roles perfectly. The shocked father, the hysterical stepmother. Two people devastated by a tragic accident that had befallen an innocent child. They gave statements to police, maintaining their innocence with the practiced ease of people who had already convinced themselves of their own lies. They spoke of safety screens that had somehow failed, of children who wandered in their sleep, of accidents that happened in the blink of an eye. But lies, like blood, have a way of seeping through even the most carefully constructed facades. The investigation that followed would captivate an entire nation. In Brazil, where family is sacred and children are cherished, the idea that parents could murder their own child was almost incomprehensible. More than 98% of Brazilians would follow this case, the highest percentage in the history of Brazilian media coverage. It wasn't just a crime. It was a collective trauma, a shattering of fundamental beliefs about family, safety, and love. As the evidence mounted, as the inconsistencies in their stories became impossible to ignore, Alexander and Anna Carolina tried to maintain their innocence. They wrote letters, touching, heartfelt declarations of love for Isabella, protests that they could never have harmed her. But the forensic evidence was relentless. Every piece of physical proof pointed to the same conclusion. Isabella had been murdered by the two people she trusted most. The trial, when it finally came, was a media sensation. For 5 days, the nation watched as prosecutors laid out their case with methodical precision. The blood evidence, the torn safety screen, the medical testimony about Isabella's injuries. And through it all, Alexander and Anna Carolina maintained their innocence, even as the walls of their deception crumbled around them. But juries, like mothers, have an instinct for protecting children. On March 27, 2010, nearly 2 years after Isabella's murder, they returned with their verdict. Guilty. Alexander was sentenced to 31 years in prison. Anna Carolina received 26 years. The judge called it homicide with triple aggravating circumstances, a legal term that fails to capture the pure evil of what they had done. But this story doesn't end with justice served and wounds healed, because some stories, some truths, continue to echo long after courtroom doors are closed. Isabella's mother, Anna Carolina, tried to rebuild her life. She spoke of beginning a new phase, of finally being able to move forward now that her daughter's killers have been held accountable. But can you imagine carrying that weight? Knowing that you entrusted your child to people who would kill her? Living with the questions that must torment every quiet moment. What if I had seen the signs? What if I had kept her home that weekend? What if? Every year on March 29th, flowers appear on Isabella's grave in the Parque dos Pinheiros Cemetery. Visitors come to pay their respects to a little girl they never met, but whose story touched their hearts. They leave toys, notes, promises that she will never be forgotten, because that's what we do with the innocents who are taken from us. We remember them. We honor them. We try to make sense of the senseless. Anna Carolina, the stepmother, has since been released from prison, her sentence reduced for good behavior. She lives quietly now, away from the spotlight that once made her one of the most hated women in Brazil. Alexander served his time and eventually returned to society, carrying with him the weight of what he had done to his own daughter. But do they sleep peacefully? Do they wake up in the night, hearing the echo of a child's cries, feeling the weight of small hands pushing against their arms as they forced her toward that window? If you believe stories like this should be told, consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. We want our true crime stories to end with closure, don't we? We want the bad guys punished, the mystery solved, the moral universe restored to its proper order. But some stories resist that kind of neat resolution. Some stories leave us with questions that gnaw at the edges of our certainty. What turns love into murder? What makes two adults decide that a 5-year-old child is such a threat to their happiness that she must be eliminated? Was it jealousy? Was Anna Carolina so consumed with hatred for her husband's past that she convinced him to destroy the living evidence of it? Or was Alexander the driving force? A man so desperate to please his new wife that he was willing to sacrifice his daughter on the altar of domestic peace? Maybe it was something darker still. Maybe it was a simple, terrible fact that some people are capable of evil that defies understanding. Maybe Isabella's only crime was existing in a world where her stepmother couldn't bear to share space with the proof of her husband's former life. The toxicology reports showed that neither Alexander nor Anna Carolina had been drinking or using drugs that night. They weren't impaired by substances, weren't operating under diminished capacity. They were sober, clear-headed, and fully aware of what they were doing when they beat a 5-year-old girl, strangled her, and threw her from a 6th-floor window, which somehow makes it worse, doesn't it? But here's the question that should keep us awake at night. How many times do we ignore the warning signs? How many times do we dismiss our instincts, our concerns, our gut feelings that something isn't right? Isabella's mother had noticed changes in her daughter. The crying, the request to come home early, the reluctance to spend time at her father's apartment. But she trusted the system, trusted that family meant safety, trusted that surely no one would hurt a child. Alexander's own family had concerns about Anna Carolina's treatment of Isabella. His grandmother even predicted with terrible accuracy what might happen, but they didn't act on those concerns. They didn't intervene. They didn't save Isabella. How many children are suffering in silence right now, hoping that someone will notice their pain and save them? How many are trying to tell us, in their own small ways, that they're not safe, that they need help, that the people who are supposed to protect them are the very ones they need protection from? We like to think that we would recognize evil when we see it, that we would act decisively to protect the innocent. But the truth is that evil often wears familiar faces. It lives in our neighborhoods, sits at our dinner tables, and sometimes even shares our beds. The monsters aren't strangers hiding in dark alleys. They're the people we trust, the people we love, the people we invite into our homes and our hearts. 15 years have passed since Isabella Nardoni died in that garden in Sao Paulo. 15 years since a 5-year-old girl learned that the world isn't always safe, that the people who are supposed to love you can sometimes be the ones who hurt you most. The London building still stands, though I imagine it's harder to rent apartments on the 6th floor. People still live their lives, raise their children, trust in the fundamental goodness of family and love. But Isabella's story echoes through all of it, a reminder that evil doesn't announce itself with horns and pitchforks. It comes disguised as ordinary people living ordinary lives until the moment they choose to do something extraordinary in its cruelty. On social media now, Isabella's mother posts tributes to her daughter on significant dates. Pictures of a beautiful little girl frozen in time, smiling with the trust and innocence that should have protected her, but didn't. 15 years without you, she writes, but you live on in my heart forever. And maybe that's the only justice we can really hope for in stories like this. Not just that the guilty are punished, but that the innocent are remembered, that their stories continue to matter, continue to teach us, continue to remind us that every child deserves protection, love, and the chance to grow up. Isabella never got that chance, but her story, horrible as it is, serves as a warning, a reminder that we must be vigilant, that we must listen, that we must act when children are in danger. Because the next time someone's grandmother says, "That woman is crazy enough to throw a child out the window," maybe, just maybe, someone will listen. There's a window in your house right now, maybe several windows. You probably don't think about them very often. They're just openings to the outside world, sources of light and fresh air. But for Isabella Nardoni, a window became something else entirely. It became the final boundary between life and death, the last thing she saw before everything went dark. Tonight, when you look out your windows, when you see the world spread out below you, remember a little girl named Isabella. Remember that she deserved better. Remember that every child deserves better. And remember that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply pay attention, listen, notice, act. Because in the space between silence and scream, between trust and betrayal, between love and violence, that's where children's lives hang in the balance. That's where we can make the difference between a story that ends in tragedy and one that ends in safety. Don't let the next Isabella fall alone.